Did you know that in 2021, 25% of Canadians and 57% of Americans reported having more mental stress than last year? Stress affects focus, decision-making, follow-through, and ability to see the forest for the trees. Let's bring some calm and order into our lives, shall we? Productivity Toolkit 2022 to the rescue. Our toolkit can bring you a breath of fresh air for better focus, help you organize, and get systematic. You get 12 actionable templates to use immediately, and you're invited to quarterly workshops about how to apply each tool now. With the 2022 Productivity Toolkit, you get 24/7 access to all the templates and tips on how to use them. This year, I divided the toolkit into 4 key themes focused on systems: power of one, power of two, power of team, and the power of scale. I know you will love them. Here's what one customer had to say about last year's toolkit. I thoroughly enjoy your productivity tutorial sessions. They help me bring a lot of improvement to my daily routine. I use some of these tips and the templates with my staff, and we are all the better for it. So get in on the VIP advanced launch by heading over to shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools. That's shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools.
Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections listeners. Today I have a wonderful guest who is an author who wrote a book that I'm very excited to read called Poetry at the Heart of Business. And I believe he's going to read to us from this book as part of the podcast interview. So I'm pretty excited about that. His name is Arend Boersema, and he is an HR and OD leader, OD meaning organizational development for anyone who isn't sure. He's a writer and a coach. He is the Senior Manager of HR and HR Business Partner Services with the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and also runs a coaching business. He has many different credentials. He started out as a teacher and student counselor after getting his bachelor's in social work and bachelor of education in secondary education in Europe, and then went on to obtain his master's in human resources development from Rochester Institute of Technology, and then became a certified PHR SHRM human resources professional. In 2021, he completed his corporate and leadership coaching training and is now in the process of getting his International Coaching Federation credentials. So he's certainly not one to rest on his laurels. Arend has experience leading HR departments and providing executive leadership coaching in various healthcare-related settings, everything from assisted living to behavioral health to pediatrics. He has taught HR courses as an adjunct professor on topics such as team dynamics, facilitation, culture, and leadership effectiveness for over 10 years. In spite of the fact that he looks very fresh-faced and young, Arend is currently leading organizational development and cultural change efforts by working with emerging leaders, senior executives, and teams. His formula for success relies on his unique process for integrating the heart and the mind using art. And I'm very excited to offer to the Culture and Leadership Connection listeners this interview with Arend Boersema today. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Marie.
I'm so glad that you could join me. I'm glad that we found each other. Please tell the audience a little bit about who you are from a non-formal bio perspective.
A non-formal, more personal perspective of my journey, in addition to the career journey, I guess. I think it's worth mentioning that even though I work and live in Philadelphia right now, I grew up in a lot of different places. So my nationality is Dutch. Both my parents are Dutch. But I was born in Indonesia because my parents were missionaries. And because of that, we traveled a lot and we lived in a lot of different countries. So I have lived in Haiti as well, and then Belgium in addition to that, and part of my internship in Ireland, where I eventually met my wife. And that's kind of what caused me to move over to the States.
That is a really interesting journey that you took. You've lived in different continents, different countries, and had quite a variety of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that made you into the person you are today?
Yeah, there's so much. I really believe in kind of like having this holistic approach to look at individuals, including if we look at our employees, where there's so much behind just the story that we hear. I think for me, one thing that really is pertinent to me, and I think it still shows up, is that I moved a lot. So that also meant that I always had to kind of start over and, try new things. Never really had a choice in the beginning because I was still living with my parents at a young age. So it really kind of forced me to embrace change. I think part of my view on the world world, including work, is really looking at figuring out how we can look at change not as something that is being done to us, but just an inevitable part of life and work, and figuring out how do we really find, a way to make it work for us and really get excited about things that change, because change can be exciting.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me some specific memories that you might have from your childhood?
Yes, I think the most challenging part was at a younger age, when I was about 12, 13 years old, where my parents moved from the Netherlands to Belgium. It sounds like a very short distance, which it is. They're two neighboring countries, and the language was still the same, different accents. So, of course, you have Belgium, the northern part of Belgium, for those that don't know, speak Flemish, which is very similar to Dutch as a language. But it was still a big change for me, considering the fact that I was completely pulled from the area that I knew. And I think as a teenager, that's a huge part where your identity is linked to your setting and not just you. You're still forming your own identity. So to be able to adapt to this whole new setting where you're not quite comfortable with anything yet, even the language, really forced me to look more inwardly to figure out what is my identity. If I can't fully connect myself to things that are happening around me, whether it is circle of friends or hobbies or sports, what is it that really shines out as being important to me in terms of who I am? So I think that was one of the memorable moments that really helped me, and not just developing my identity, but also having an idea of what drives identity. And I think I have that lens and that perspective still now as identities continue to evolve.
Do you think when you were 12, you were thinking in terms of how am I going to form my identity?
I don't think I was really looking at that. It's really more of, you're being shocked because the people that you interact with day in, day out, you don't have those around you more, right? So the people that you go to school with, the people that you hang out with. So I think for me, it was really just kind of having to struggle with those emotions, right? To figure out, how do I build this up? But I think a huge part of that did give me the ability to really think about, how do I want to intentionally build it up? I may have not always been the best, student in terms of following rules and orders. And I think that shift actually did allow me to kind of look at things differently, to say, if this is a fresh start, how do I want to approach this?
So I'm going to give you something more specific from my life. When I was 12, I went to live in Germany for a year from Canada. So I went from Canada to Germany. I lived with two different sets of relatives, and I went to school there. And I have a very distinct memory of going to school with one of my cousins. And it was actually taught by nuns. And the nuns would call you up to the front of the class and you would have to say something. And my German was pretty limited at that point. So I said something that was not appropriate, not because I was trying to be rude, but because I didn't know enough German, right? So the nun was really angry and the class burst out laughing. And I realized that there was something in the two languages that I didn't get. And later my cousin explained to me, do you know why everybody laughed and why she was so mad at you? And I didn't know. It was because I used do instead of Z. So I should have said Z, which is the formal way you'd speak to a teacher. But I said do because I didn't know how to conjugate with Z. And so that would have been considered extremely rude. And that's when I suddenly realized that there is a difference in the way people perceive and speak to each other according to their station. It just hit me that I needed to learn how to negotiate with authority in different ways than what I was used to. And it's a very distinct memory because I never remembered having any of those kinds of things before that. So I'm wondering if when you went to Belgium, is there something specific like that, something that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great story. And I can certainly identify with that, knowing that if you kind of compare even just the two countries of the Netherlands and Belgium in terms of their customs and their way of interacting, Belgium is much more focused on formal hierarchy. It's very much a culture of respect for the elders, where not that the Netherlands doesn't have that, but it's much more of an area where free thinking and really, expressing without necessarily any, hesitations what your opinions are. For me, what was really challenging was that, I was brought up in this educational system and a cultural system where speaking up was encouraged. You don't have language patterns that really kind of identify the different levels in terms of how do you address a teacher, how do you address a parent. You do have it, but it wasn't as formally used. In Belgium, that was. So for me, I think one thing that really stood out was right before we moved, and the move was really driven by the fact that my father, had a new job, so that caused us to move. We knew it for a couple of months before we actually moved. So I know that really kind of amplified my rebellious years. And I certainly wasn't really interested in doing well in school. When I finally moved, I did kind of, I think, even at that young age, reflect on it and say, is that really what I should be doing? The challenge that I encountered was that even though I feel like I had told myself, I don't really want to necessarily be somebody that is against authority, or, although I still don't quite fully blindly follow authority even until this day. But I realized that I didn't want to necessarily just push myself against something just for the sake of being against it.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge was, the way I spoke, because of my accent, everything sounded a little bit more direct and more confrontational, even though I didn't really have that intent. So I do remember that, where even in the beginning of the school year, where I tried to kind of express myself, it was to the amusement of the students, because it felt like I was being, defiant.
Mm-hmm.
Even though my intent was not to be that. So really kind of figuring out, so how do you really, learn a culture where it's so easy to assume that it's the same culture because there's so many similarities. And as a child at that age, I didn't understand the nuances well enough to understand that they are two different cultures. So just me speaking up in a way that was not really done in the new setting definitely caused me to have some difficult conversations with both teachers and parents, but also allowed me to really kind of think again, like, what is the impact of your words? What is the impact of how you show up? The lessons learned really came later, I think, once I started reflecting more on it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting that you would choose to speak about two countries that were similar and the culture and language that were similar. I have a friend who worked with Katimavik, which is sort of a youth exchange program, one of many. And when she went to a country that was very different from, I think, in Indonesia, from where she was born in Canada. And she also went to another province in Canada, the other side. So she was from the West. She went to Eastern Canada to a French family and French community. And she said that it was much harder for her to adapt to being in her own country in a new region than it was for her to adapt to being in Indonesia. Because when she was in Indonesia, she expected she wouldn't know anything and she'd have to learn it all from scratch and negotiate everything from the beginning. But when she was in her own country, she thought this should be easy, but it wasn't easy. And she just kept thinking, I should know this. This should be easy. And that was really a barrier for her. Did you find that too?
Completely. And I still think that's relevant nowadays. If I look at like adults and how they show up in company culture, like a company culture is just the same as a country's culture. And you see that a lot where people, if they move, but the move is fairly similar to the type of setting that they're used to, you see those leaders and those employees actually making more missteps than those that go to a completely new industry because they don't know what to expect. So they just kind of take a backseat and take it all in. Sometimes we just kind of skip that first phase of let me just observe and learn. This is like the Shine's iceberg concept of a culture. Learn not just those, like things that you see, but also all of these other cultural habits and norms that are below the surface, the bottom part of the iceberg.
So from groups that you were born into, and because you were born into a missionary family, a Dutch family, I'm sure your family had its own culture, maybe the region where you were born, and might have been rural or urban or something in between. So those groups that you were born into, what would you say has influenced your sense of culture and your sense of self as a leader now?
The biggest thing that I've really been thinking of a lot lately, especially with everything that the world, but also America is going through in terms of really calling out, racial injustice and systemic issues that we have. It's really inward focused idea again of what is really important to me, what is valuable to me. And maybe there are certain things that I was considering as in, justice or the right thing to do that might not be the right thing anymore. So I think being part of so many subcultures, and yet another subculture, I think that's important to me, that's definitely playing a part in how I view the world, is that I'm part of a large family, 4 siblings, 2 older ones, and then 2 younger ones. Then the 2 younger ones are adopted from Haiti at a young age. But what they really taught me was this whole different perspective on the world. And obviously empathy can't be 100%, right? There's only a portion. Like we didn't go through the same thing. I'm not going through the same thing that other people are going through. But talking about their perspectives of being, a minority and in a white country really allowed me to make sure that I continue to second guess the way I do things, or that I continue to second guess what my values and standards are.
So that is the experience of adopting from Haiti and living in Haiti and then coming back. Did you come back to Holland after that, or where did you go after Haiti?
We did. Yep. After Haiti, we went to the Netherlands. Actually, that was the first time that I started living in the Netherlands. Before that, I only lived in other countries.
Okay. So what would you say about being in a Dutch family and being part of a missionary family? What has affected you over the long term, would you say? And then the reassembling and questioning how your perspective, because you had racialized siblings that were having a different experience from you, and you're empathetic, so you definitely paid attention to that. At the same time, I'm saying what's buried deeper.
Yeah, I think the most difficult part, at least from my perspective, is just to kind of come to that acknowledgement that we may have not had it right, or that we may not known everything, or just acceptance that, like people have individualized perspectives.
I mean, right now you're looking back and you're saying, okay, well, maybe I didn't get it right. But at the time, what affected you?
Yeah, and it's hard to separate that, right? Because obviously our conscious keeps evolving, and and it's hard to really put yourself in the shoes fully at that stage without having the additional tools and insights that you've picked up along the way. But if I can think back to that, I think what the realization at that point was, people have different perspectives, right? What you see on face value, there's so much richness behind that, and you might not even understand that. So I think that was something I already learned at a really young age, that if you interact with others, you're hearing things, and obviously we're putting that in categories to make sense of the world, but just this curiosity about what else is behind it, from where the other person is coming from, just that realization that there's so much behind it, and that everyone really comes with all of their richness to a story, and you will only see a fraction of that. It's something what was really instilled in me in a fairly young age, whether it was through the concept of sure that people feel accepted, make sure you don't judge people, but really from the perspective of it's because we don't necessarily know or can know everything that somebody is going through, all the richness that they bring to the table. But it's a positive thing, and it never was like intended to shut us down, to say, therefore, make sure you don't say anything wrong, but it was more as an encouragement to say, therefore, explore it, have those conversations, be curious.
So are you saying then that in your family, it was encouraged to question, to speak out, to express yourself, and to bring up things that may have been problematic to discuss?
I think it did, but just like any family, of course, there's certain primary truths and secondary truths, right? So the intent is always to figure out what are your primary truths that you really kind of ground yourself in, and then what are derivative truths that are built on that, but they can be subject to change. So obviously, if I go back like 20, 25, 30 years, we didn't have that type of language, but it was really kind of saying we have our family values, and those are our family values, but there are other ones as well. And some we might disagree on, but there's actually more that we can disagree on and have good conversations around, where it doesn't need to ostracize us. So other than what you've heard from my family composition, as part of being a missionary family, religion was obviously also very much center. The values that I received specifically from my dad as well, who taught religion, but also missionary work. So there was a lot of focus on different religions, is that there's actually many more similarities to the different religions that we see in the world than there are differences. So it was really kind of to say, look for that, like figure that out, explore that.
That's what you grew up with? That was the attitude of your family?
Yeah.
Well, that's very unusual for a missionary family.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it comes from the Dutch perspective. I don't know. So when I was growing up, my family was Catholic. I'm not Catholic now, I'm a Baha'i. But my family was Catholic, and we were the only Catholics on the street. And also we were in a nuclear family, so meaning that we didn't have any relatives. The relatives lived in different countries, right? So our family were other outcasts from other cultures that didn't have family. So I always felt when I was growing up that I was on the outside of everything. And that really has shaped who I am. Being on the outside meant that I had to sit on the edge of the border and look on the inside and look on the outside and never feel like I belonged anywhere. I had to figure that out. I had to negotiate the tightrope of interaction with feeling very insecure about belonging. And I also felt vulnerable in my family, because if anything went wrong, if there were any problems in the family, there was no one else to go to. There were no relatives. There were no friends that were close enough that you could call on, because there had been established a kind of sense of distrust of the neighbors because they weren't the right religion. There was no place to go. So I also felt trapped. I felt like I didn't belong, but I also felt trapped. So both of those things have continued to influence me today, right? Yet I felt the religious upbringing that I had gave me a lot of gifts that I wouldn't have had otherwise, right? So it gave me a sense of structure, a sense of values, a sense of the idea that the actions that you do, they affect everything and everyone. So therefore you have to think carefully about what you do. You can't just jump in and be a bull in the china shop, which I was doing initially. But you just, because the structure was bigger than you were. So all of those kinds of things, sort of a beauty and respect of an awe of the divine and the supernatural and the mysterious and the artistic, all of those things were all a part of my upbringing. So it was like I had these disconnects, but I also had all of these gifts. So I'm wondering for you, did you experience something like that, or was your experience very different?
It depends on what you mean by the experience, because I think there's a lot to that, right? And again, I think this totally highlights the fact there's so much richness behind every individual. I would have never known that if you hadn't shared that with me. I really appreciate that. I like how you're kind of putting it into a couple of different buckets, right? The buckets of, hey, these are really the values that were taught to me, and I've been able to build on those riches, but also there's been some challenges, and they too have shaped me. I talked a little bit about what are these values that really helped you to enrich your position in life. I think I talked a little bit about that, but certainly that doesn't mean that it didn't come with challenges. And I think if I kind of look back at that age, it's difficult for me to dissect where those challenges come from, because I think being a teenager, you face challenges, right? Like there's a lot that's difficult, right? Like fitting in, finding out what norms are, the concept of popularity, like all of those things definitely made an impact on me as well, whether it was within my family network, whether it was within the religious network or other networks like school network. I think those things are challenges, but I do think that allows you to morph and grow as well. But if I look at the challenges back then, what was really tough for me is just this concept that a lot of change was done to me. The fact that I had to go to church is certainly something that was like, do I really need to, like as a teenager? And that freedom didn't come until later. So just the challenge I felt like were done to me was the fact that we moved to different countries, right? That I had to start over. And those challenges, even though those were tough to really kind of absorb and come to terms with at the time, I think the way they are shaping my worldview now is that even though there's always going to be a lot of things that are being done to you, there's still this like freedom to choose how you want to make it. And again, your mindset is, in my opinion, way more impactful to that experience than the actual setting, right? Than the actual environment. I couldn't say that then. So I certainly had my moments where I was still defiant to my parents, moments where I still was really frustrated or went to my room and felt like I was completely alone or wanted to be left alone. My rebellious years as any teenager were certainly there as well. But I think it was more of this concept that change is being done to people. And I'm now kind of learning more that even within that, and even though I had those difficult moments, I still was able to figure out, okay, once I came to terms with it, what do I really want to do with this? Because it could be an opportunity if you allow it to be an opportunity.
Well, when we first started speaking today, you were talking about how you had a day with opportunities, which other people would have classified as difficulties. So I think that really is a lens that you use to see the world, right? That you've developed, that's evolved from having to respond to change that you didn't choose, and that you then chose to see as an opportunity, or live in defiance and grief for the entire time, which is really unpleasant, and most people don't like to be there for very long. So what about groups that you chose to belong to? You chose to belong to social work groups, to education, to human resources, to becoming a coach. Like those are all just sort of professional choices, but there may have been other things too. It could have been hobbies, could have been other languages that you learned, could have been different affiliations. What have you chosen to belong to that's affected your development and who you are now?
Yeah. So as a teenager, I didn't really quite know what I wanted to do. And even though I kind of went to school, like my first bachelor's was in education, it felt weird because people didn't really see me, like continuously being in a school and having that be part of like your identity. The reason for me really kind of to choose that at that stage was because I really enjoyed this concept of constantly growing, but also seeing connections and learning additional insights that you didn't know before, but then also sharing it. So I think until later, I really discovered HR. Like I had no idea in my early college years what HR was. Right now, if I look at my career and parts of work, but also outside of work that I think really make up my identity, it is definitely HR. And it's funny because I do still see a little bit of like that rebellious attitude show up in me identifying with that. Is because if you think about like HR, a lot of people will have bad things to say about it. Or a lot of people will think about HR in the sense of like, oh, it's that backroom office that does, hiring and terminations, or that does their benefits. So there's a little bit of that rebellion in me that still comes out to say, I appreciate you're thinking that, but there's so much more to it. And if you dive into the world of HR, like you did the introduction, I call myself, an HR leader, but also an OD, an organizational development leader. I attach a huge part of my identity to just be able to connect with leaders in organizations and to really talk through and have them kind of share their experience and then, coach them along the way by either being a sounding board or providing additional perspectives. I think a huge part of my identity is HR and coaching, but not necessarily in the traditional sense where I link it to content, but more in the sense of where I link it to how that shows up in relationships. So really being a listener, being there to help other people be successful is certainly that is a driver for me.
Mm-hmm. So in your position right now, you have to follow a system and you have to work within the system. And there's always a big emphasis on policies and compliance and things like that in HR. But in your coaching, you have the chance to work with someone on their terms and your terms in a way that's more fluid and organic, more responsive, more freedom-based.
Mm-hmm. And even in HR, beyond just the foundational systems that are put in place to really build a culture that creates some consistency and predictability for employees, right? Because those are the reasons why you have policies, guidelines. Beyond that, there's still a lot of room to really also be future thinking. So from my past experiences, companies that I've been part of, they always really encourage creative thinking. So if there was something that was written that wasn't really helping, like in a sense that it wasn't helping the organization or it wasn't really helping employees, there always would have been the ask, well, then let's change it. So I think within that, there was always this freedom as well given to say it needs to work on a larger scale, right? So it needs to be a systemic approach. But if you have ideas of how to do things differently, let's hear it. Let's figure out how we can do it differently. And I think the last year and a half has really allowed me to embrace that, to say that we know how to do business and we've done it for a long time, but the setting and the different things that we're experiencing, again, whether it is the pandemic or social unrest or the concept of needing to address systemic racism, it really allowed us to say, let's not just follow business as usual, but really kind of understand what's going on and figure out where's that creativity that we can use to do things differently? And those answers aren't easy, but it's that process of talking with others and brainstorming and thinking through it that really excites me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have hobbies, interests? Have you learned different languages? Have any of those influenced you? Are you still within the same religion that you grew up with, or has that changed?
I still consider myself a very religious person. I do think the spirituality of religion has grown and become much more important to me than maybe some of the dogma that a religion introduces. So I think that's a little bit of where I've grown. From a hobbies perspective and other influences, I've obviously, from living in different countries, had to speak different languages, but I'm actually not that great at languages. So it really always, cost me a lot of attention to learn something. But despite that, I still find a lot of joy in really exploring languages, even the English language, just learning, different nuances, different local dialects or fun little idiosyncrasies. It always excites me. And it's obviously something that's captured in my hobby of writing spoken word poetry as well.
Well, that's a great segue for you to be able to perform one of your pieces for us. Would you be willing to do that?
Most definitely, yeah. I'll be honored to do so. So a little bit of a background. The book that I wrote, I call it a passion project, something that I did on the side. And it was really one of my ways to kind of make sense of a world that was so difficult to make sense of throughout the pandemic. So it really was first and foremost a way for me to kind of process my thoughts and kind of make sense of the world. But then like you said, the title is Poetry at the Heart of Business. And then the subtitle is really talking about using spoken word poetry to explore the concept of company culture and belonging. I love this conversation that we've had and really looking at the concept of culture, whether it is company culture or other cultures, and then this concept of do you belong or do you not belong, and how it forms that an identity. The one thing that I wanted to read, poetry or a little snippet that I chose, it's titled Small Talk, Big Impact. And again, I've written this really through the lens of self-reflection on different interactions that can take place on the job.
Cool.
All right. Rushed for the door, yelled, "Please keep it open," from a couple feet away. The elevator slowly closes until a flash of blue scrubs and white sneaker peeks out, slowing down the doors in its track. Pausing to leave for one needed moment. I enter with a quick nod and acknowledgement. I click on the floor button and look down where my thoughts are gathered in complex patterns. Do lists mixed with impossibilities. Not enough time. I try to focus this mind of mine before my whole world shatters. I'm holding it together, but barely. Patience paper thin, Running thinner with each added matter of great importance. Staying focused is the game I'm in. Heavy burden that I carry, the worries that I gather is no easy feat to be a savior's kin. It's a hot one. A voice interrupts to my astonishment. I look up and forgot to avoid eye contact. That's how they get you in their trap. As punishment, he follows up with a, how's your day going? As if he cares. As if I care. Should have stayed focused and not reward his confidence. But I forced the fake smile. He smiled back, as if it was an accomplishment. Where are you heading next? Get coffee stats. Same here, my friend. Can I walk with you? I was too slow on the draw, and again I fell for his trap. Getting unstuck in my consciousness, felt a contrived feeling of needing to understand this man's path and what lies beneath it, a glimpse of wonderment. As if he was a mind reader, with every step he kept sharing facts and feelings. He talked about his wife, his kids, his kind eyes leading me down memory lane, and with this energy the same, he shared sorrow stories and how they helped him find meaning. Found it intriguing, and as our order was up, out of nowhere I blared, let me pay. So strange, this offer I made is extremely rare, but it felt good. Right before we both went our way, I said, way late, I didn't catch your name. He responded with a smirk, it's Self. Okay, Self, take care. That's it. That's the small talk,
Wow.
big impact.
Wow. That's great. Anything you want to say about that poem?
I don't want to give too much meaning to it because I'm hoping that people see different things in it based on what's important to them. But I think the one thing that I would highlight, and this is one learning curve that I'm still actively going through, there's so much value in just these like small interactions that we have. And companies are nowadays focusing a lot on self-care and resiliency and wellness, which is totally the right thing to do. But just this concept of connecting with others and learning where others are and how they are going to can be such a valuable form of self-care as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just connecting with another human spirit. Random connection that has a big impact, like your poem. Yeah. So what would you say you were born with temperament-wise? You know, like what makes Arend who he is from what you were born with, and then your personality evolved over time depending on how you responded to opportunities and challenges that came up. But what were you born with? What have you evolved into personality-wise?
I think I could be very passionate, and I think that's still definitely shining through. In my younger years, maybe not as controlled as it should have been. And I don't think I'm probably the only one with that experience. But the one thing that has been constant is really just passion that comes with a lot of things. Again, in my younger years, that passion may have come out in this concept of I need to be right, or I am right, or you are wrong, and this needs to happen. Now I think it's a little bit more in this passion of so much that I'm learning. I want to learn more, and I love just still going into dialogue with people. And for an outsider, it might seem like we're, actively disagreeing, and it might seem painful and even aggressive at times. I love this whole concept of just like sparring and just like bouncing ideas back and forth. And I love people contradicting me and disagreeing with me. I think it fuels my passion.
Mm-hmm. And what has evolved over time?
Yeah, I think in the past, it was really, and this is, I think, a little bit where my social work came in as well, right? Really this concept of being a social justice warrior, really, wanting to change the world. And I think at times it's really challenging for people like social workers because there's so much world to change, and it can feel very overwhelming. So I think what's kind of adopted and changed is I still have this idea that I can change the world, but it morphs into an idea that I can't change the world alone, and friction and opposition is not always the best way to change the world is kind of what I'm learning more and more. And sometimes the simple act of showing up is changing the world as well. It's kind of like your presence, and specifically your active presence in the moment can be a form of resistance in itself.
Being present, being collaborative, those things you've...
Yeah, exactly that. It's being present. I think what's been a notion that has changed over time is that I used to feel that if I feel very strongly about something and I don't speak up about it, I am not staying true to what I believe in. I think that has changed now. And if I think very passionate about something, I don't necessarily need to speak up. There's other ways that I can show that. And I'm trying to kind of like balance it with other things that are important to me. So even though speaking up about a topic might be important to me, recognizing the other as a valued individual is also important to me. How do I marry those values that could sometimes be in conflict?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's about your actions and matching your words and not your words disrupting or being there without action. And it's the interactive quality that you've been talking about throughout the interview in HR. With social work and with HR, you develop because you need to interact and have a dialogue with people. And that's different than forcing your way in or jumping in and saying, this is it, do it this way.
Yep.
But it also means you're still ready to stand up for something and to propose a more just solution. Am I getting this right or am I off?
No, that's exactly where my mind is going. That's kind of what I meant by that. And how I often look at it is that, it's good to have values, obviously. But I think it's also good to recognize that the opposite of an absolute value could be another absolute value. And I think if we only get stuck on the fact that they're different, we're losing a lot of opportunity to find common ground and to pursue things collectively. So I think just recognizing that even though I have strong values, if I care about the other person, then I would need to understand that they have their values that are important to them as well. So how do we then kind of come together? And I think once you kind of get over that hump, there's so much more things that you have in common, and then such a more pleasant way of kind of struggling through problems than really kind of being in that juxtaposition where, everything seems obsolete and not able to be reconciled.
Can you recall a time when you became aware that your cultural understandings were very specific to your culture and not just the norm for everybody else?
I think one of the things that really stands out for me was, when I was in Belgium, that's where I lived when I went to college as well. And part of my college experience was to do an internship or an externship in Ireland. So a different country, but still within the European Union. I think the realization that I had there, and it kind of grew over time, was that because we were all international students, we were all put together within the same area of dorms of international students, where I really kind of realized that there's so much more to perspectives than my perspectives. Was the fact that I was obviously getting acclimated to the fact that, my culture is different than the Irish culture. And in Ireland, I think, for me, where it really showed up was the fact that I was doing my internship for social work. So really kind of to see the different ways social inequity popped up. And I really realized that in Belgium, it's often kind of along the lines of race as well, right? Social inequity is linked to different minority groups. That wasn't necessarily always the case in Ireland because there's such a low level of diversity in Ireland. There's so few immigrants. So it kind of really took different shapes. But then that was really amplified with the fact that there were all of these other international students coming from all over the world, from France, from Italy, from America. So really having those conversations within the construct of our social work classes really opened up my eyes. I thought I knew things, but that really taught me that there was still so much more that I just didn't know.
Yeah, you had this double experience of being in a more or less homogenous culture that has resisted immigration. In fact, Ireland exports more people than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
So they export, but they don't import. So you had that, plus you're with an international student group where there's a lot of negotiating taking place. You're all in a third space together learning, but you're also very different. Certainly that would have been a very disassociative experience that would have required a number of years afterwards to kind of make sense of, I would think.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think in the moment, you're just kind of like take it all in, right? And you're trying to make some sense of it, but you also realize that you're just taking it in to, like you said, carry it with you. And then, through just ongoing reflection and thinking of things, I do feel like you said, especially the years after that really kind of brought me back to those moments of like, oh, now I think I understand it better after, dissecting it a little bit more or thinking about it through different contexts.
So if you were going to explain to an employer or a coaching client, what's the best way to work with you? What do you need to be able to bring your authentic self to the relationship?
What I always really appreciate is people being honest. So what I love is this concept of disagree with me if you disagree. We're not disagreeing with each other. We're disagreeing about a topic that we're talking about together. So really kind of that focus on togetherness and saying, I want you to challenge me. And I will say in my coaching conversations, I would put that on the table almost from the get-go to really say, hey, if it's okay with you, I'm going to give some observations, but I want you to tell me if I'm wrong with them, with these observations, because that's how I can learn, and that's how we can really get the most out of these discussions.
Mm-hmm. Very Dutch, really.
I really think it is. And I will say part of me sometimes feels like the American culture is a little bit easier to adapt to than the Belgian culture was, because there's so much similarities between the Dutch culture and the American culture.
Yeah, I agree.
I think from some of my HR studies, what I learned, and I still kind of refer to it as he is actually a Dutch person as well, coincidentally. Hofstede, his model of looking at cultures through different lenses, and really kind of the model where he puts different cultures on a spectrum with two continuums, really allowed me to kind of see, well, what cultures are similar and how are they different? So you have a lot of cultures that are more masculine in essence, and the traditional ones come to mind, right? Like Italy and such, and then more cultures that are more feminine in essence. And the same thing can be said for these other
Sweden.
continuums. Exactly, like Sweden, very much a caring community. And he puts like different cultures on these different spectrums, and the directness or indirectness is certainly one of those spectrums where, it stands out for me, so involved with interactions of different people and managing people.
Mm-hmm. You just struck me with that thought that Geert Hofstede, who's considered to be the founder of cultural studies in many ways, was Dutch, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that perspective of being able to look out into the world and see the variety, and then to see where are the commonalities in these systems, in these cultural systems. I wonder how much that's linked to the way the Dutch see the world generally. I don't know. You might know better than me.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I'll have to look into that. So anything you'd like to promote?
No, I just really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this. I love the connection between how individuals show up and how their past shaped them who they are, and then how that kind of comes out nowadays, whether it's in work or life or work life. The only thing I would really just want to promote is that poem that I read from the book Poetry at the Heart of Business is available on Amazon as well in, I think, almost all countries. So feel free to explore it either by searching for Poetry at the Heart of Business in Amazon, or you can find more information on my website, which is levelupcoachingconsulting.com.
Perfect. And we'll put all of that inside the show notes. Anything else you'd like to say before we end?
Again, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate going a little deeper than some other conversations are going. This was very much appreciated.
Awesome. It's been wonderful to host you, Arend.
Arend Boersema had the life of moving from place to place as a child of a missionary family. Although he was born in Indonesia and had siblings from Haiti where he also lived, his most difficult cultural adjustment memory involved moving from the Netherlands to Belgium. As many multi-country dwellers will attest, a move to similar countries can frequently be a more difficult cultural adjustment than moving to a place where one expects to start fresh. Learning to balance his passion for social justice with a need to communicate effectively with people who could disagree with him, Arend became skilled in negotiations, which he now applies to his work in human resources and organizational development. It was a pleasure to interview Arend, and I enjoyed exploring the richness of his life experience with him. Thank you for listening. Do share the episode with a friend to help spread the word about this podcast episode. And may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much.